I'm here to talk about technology. We all know that technology is playing an increasing role in our lives, but I think this means that we need empathetic connections more than ever. Now that applies to companies as well. Now, some people might say empathetic connections or corporate empathy is something of an oxymoron. They're two words that should never be put together. But I think this is no longer the case. Empathy is actually the emotional impact a company has on society and on its people. But sadly, it's often conspicuous by its absence. So I'm sure a lot of you here will have seen this video. Earlier in April this year, a 69-year-old doctor was violently wrenched out of an airline seat that he had paid for. He suffered from concussion, a broken nose, 2 broken teeth, and the company behind this extraordinary rendition of one of their own paying customers was, of course, United Airlines. Overnight, hundreds of thousands of consumers took to the social media and took to the internet to express their disgust at United Airlines' unforgivable actions. They published thousands of withering criticisms and blistering memes. But more than that, they expressed their empathy with the situation of Dr. David Dow. He was unconscious, he was bloody, he was broken. This could have happened to any one of us. So United Airlines CEO and staff alike were criticized for a spectacular lack of empathy. And within a week, within 7 days, their share price had fallen by $1 billion. So too often there is an empathy gap between companies and their consumers. And this can not only result in explosive PR disasters like the United Airlines fiasco, but it's also been proven to affect a company's bottom line. According to Belinda Parmar, who's the author of the Global Empathy Index, which is kind of a ranking of the most and least empathetic companies on the planet, corporate empathy directly relates to a company's growth, a company's earnings, and a company's productivity. For example, employees in the top 10 most empathetic companies generate 50% more earnings than those in the bottom 10%. And we can appreciate now just how little empathy United Airlines showed for Dr. David Dow, and we can see how dearly it cost them. But companies can no longer afford this empathy gap in 2017. And this is because humanity has evolved to a species known as Phono sapien, where we do pretty much everything on our mobile devices. They're absolutely essential companions for most of us. And mobile devices are personal and ubiquitous in a way that has simply never existed before. They have quickly and convincingly populated the planet, and the speed of consumer adoption of mobile tech is in sharp contrast to the speed of change of many companies. So for example, 23 years ago, there was 1% mobile device penetration compared to the human population. And in 2017, that figure is now at 100%, so we've actually reached parity in 23 years. 8 years ago, less than 1% of web traffic globally came from mobile devices. In 2017, most web traffic globally now comes from mobile devices. And this trend is only going one way. Mobile traffic is increasing by 30% year on year, while traffic from desktops and laptops is falling by 20%. And this is actually initiating a whole new era in terms of business practice and consumer behavior. As Julie Ask from Forrester Research calls it, we've moved from the age of manufacturing in the 1900s through to the age of distribution in the 1960s, through to the age of information in the 1990s. And then recently, we arrived in the age of the customer, where empowered Phono sapiens are demanding a new level of customer obsession. And this new era of the customer, this age of the customer, has 4 business imperatives. So these are things that every business should be aware of. So number 1 is to embrace the mobile mind shift. We simply behave differently now that we have this empowerment through mobile devices. Number 2 is to become a digital disruptor. There's an old saying, disrupt or be disrupted, and it's never been more true. Number 3 is to turn big data into business insights. We have more data about customers than ever before, and these need to be used to make customers' lives better. And number 4 is to completely transform the customer experience. Now, this last point about the customer experience, the CX, is absolutely vital. Put simply, the more that the phonosapien is informed, the more they're able to exercise discernment, and the more they're able to share their opinions, the less likely they are to tolerate a bad customer experience. And what this means in practical terms, well, Harris Research asked people how many would interact with a company after a bad experience. Now, 8 years ago, the answer to that was a fairly forgiving 41%. Just 4 years later, that figure had plummeted to 14%. So it's clear that the trend for the phonosapien is towards zero tolerance for a bad customer experience. And this means that businesses don't really get a second chance. There's almost zero margin for error. And this battle of the CX has also been called Uberization. And this is when one new entrant into the marketplace comes up with a CX that's so compelling, it disrupts an entire industry. And the implications of this battle of the CX are amplifying and accelerating. According to Forrester, again, within 5 years, the only differentiator for most businesses will be the customer experience. So bridging this empathy gap, this gap of a bad customer experience, really needs to be a priority for most companies. And I think the key to this is adopting a personal approach to interactions with consumers. But sadly, many companies can't do personal. A small number do personalized very well, such as Amazon, who do it brilliantly. But personal interactions are informed by empathy and understanding. They're about understanding an individual and what could make them happy in their moment of need. So if companies can truly be there for their customers when it counts, and consistently and continually make their lives better, they get advocacy and enthusiasm in return, and great loyalty. So bridging this empathy gap is so important, bridging this bad CX gap. But unfortunately, many companies can't do this because of the existing lines of communications that they're using. In fact, many companies have a customer operations problem, maybe without even realizing it. Let's look at those lines of communication. Now, email is something I think everybody probably uses, but in terms of business-to-consumer communications, it's not really effective. Most people will ignore every email from a company, and almost nobody will interact with it. Email has an open rate of just 20% and a click-through rate of 2%. And in fact, 70% of emails sent globally could be classified as spam. And what about apps? Well, we've kind of been through an app gold rush, but really the app boom is over. A quarter of apps installed today are never used, and a further 26% are used only once. And out of the top 20 apps in the US, only 3 are showing signs of any growth. The other 17 are declining year on year. And what about this next scenario? I'm sure it might be sadly familiar to many people here. Your call is very important to us. Please enjoy this 40-minute flute solo. So I actually spoke to somebody in Rapid City, and they said a friend of theirs had a 6-hour flute solo experience. They'd been on hold to a well-known furniture company for 6 hours. So this is really suboptimal. But let's look at this situation through the eyes of empathy. So this is Paul and his daughter Megan, and he's the caller, and he doesn't actually want to call your service desk. He doesn't want to stop playing with his daughter. He doesn't want to hold until you, the company, are ready to speak to him. He doesn't want to explain why he's calling or who he is again. And he especially doesn't want to have to go and dig up the old invoice to get his order number, and especially not to confirm that the Tuesday 3 p.m. delivery slot still works for him. So how can we make this scenario better? With the empathetic interaction. The empathetic interaction is about a company embracing the countless invisible moments to surprise and delight their customers by offering information, engagements, experiences, and alerts that they will value at precise times in exact locations. It's about a company using what they know about the individual and their circumstances and preempting what will make them happy. When a customer's needs and a business needs can be met in a single moment, empathetic interactions can be really powerful. And on the planet of the phonosapien, there is no more effective way for a business to connect with one of their consumers than by mobile messaging. SMS has an open rate of 98%. Compare that to the open rate of 2% for emails. And in fact, 83% of millennials will open a text message within 90 seconds of receiving it. So the ways in which businesses can interact with consumers are many, but these can be boiled down to 7 key empathetic moments. Number 1 is delivery and arrival moments. Here's a text message saying, hey, is 4 p.m. still okay for your engineer visit? Text back, yes or no. And there's a lot of complexity under here. It's actually saving the company a bunch of money if they don't send out an engineer and they miss the appointment. And it's making the customer so happy that they don't miss the engineer appointment. So it's very simple, but it's a complex microtransaction under the hood. Number 2 is trigger moments, where you're looking for feedback in the moment from somebody. So here somebody's been asked to rate their stay at the Grand Hotel. And the thing about this is that it's going to be opened instantly. It's not going to be missed like an email and opened in 2 weeks' time when nobody can remember really how their stay was anyway. Number 3 is behavior moments. This lady has just checked in for her flight. It's a little bit delayed, so instead of ignoring her, the airline is going to send her a text message with the details of her flight and a free coffee. So this is actually altering her behavior and making her a bit happier. Number 4 is purchase moments. Now this is an interesting one because it's really about a company cutting through the noise of all the different advertising channels and all the different media channels to reach a consumer and helping them to make a purchase with that company instead of the others. So in this instance, they're being sent a mobile voucher, which is really powerful. Number 5 is payment moments, and this is really about providing surety of payment. So one company, FICO, introduced this solution, and they experienced a 35% drop in credit card fraud. At the same time, they experienced a 20% rise in customer satisfaction. So it's a great example of a win-win solution. And in these days of hackers and security breaches, it's really important for companies to look after their consumers by offering them 2-factor authentication on their mobile devices. And finally, request for info moments. So this is where a lady has asked for a number of different quotes for a car service, but one of the companies she's asked has replied and said, it's going to cost this much, it's a special offer, just reply yes to confirm your booking. So it's a kind of empathetic nudge towards completing the sale, which is really valuable. So these intelligent automated mobile messages are just really about making people's lives better. This is Tom and his son Josh, and they've gone to a big family resort in the US, and they've just got a message saying that there's short queues on Rocket Mountain. 10 minutes later, it's liftoff. So this is the technology really becoming invisible. Now, these solutions built around mobile messaging are opening up a whole new vector of customer engagement, because for too long, interactions between brands and consumers have been based on a brand's agenda rather than the consumer's. But the empathetic moment is about knowing the individual and the situation they're in, and then anticipating what's going to make them happy. So companies can be useful, they can be timely, and above all, they can be empathetic. So coming back to that horizontal timeline, are we now moving into the age of empathy? Well, I think we're all ready for it. And in the era of the phono sapien, there's simply no excuse for companies not to treat us with a bit more respect, a bit more consideration, and a bit more empathy. And as we saw with United Airlines, the cost of the empathy gap can be enormous, but there's also a great opportunity for companies to narrow this empathy gap by using the right technology in the right way to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, companies are just people. We're all people. So this is about human-to-human connections. And the more that we have technology in our lives, the more important it is for empathy to be at the heart of all of our interactions. Interactions within businesses, interactions using tech, and interactions between all of us, interactions between you and me. So embracing this empathetic interaction is really embracing the future of how we interact as a globally interconnected species. But it starts with every one of us as individuals. So let's make the world a more empathetic place together. Thank you.